The internet talks so highly of Fractal Design's Meshify C and how nice it is to build in it. Today I'm going to find out if the internet knows what it's talking about. Well, about the Meshify C anyways. The internet is a dark, dark place. Now before moving on, if you like what I'm doing here, could you please subscribe to the channel and like the video? It helps a lot. Now with that out of the way, the Meshify C comes in white and black, and with a few different panel options as well. The dimensions are 45.5 centimeters high by 21 centimeters wide by 39.5 centimeters deep and weighs 6.45 kilos. The Meshify C comes with a little box that has all the case accessories. You get a number of cable ties, a chamois, and all the screws and standoffs you'll need. Fractal Design also provides a nicely illustrated user manual. The front panel of the Meshify C has a black metal mesh with an unusual polygonal shape inside a plastic frame. There is a thin foam filter behind the mesh to help stop dust from getting inside the case. There is also a small Fractal Design logo on the front mesh, but for the most part, the front is left open to help maximize airflow. The front I/O is located on the top of the front panel and consists of two USB 3.0 ports, an audio out and microphone port, as well as the power and reset buttons. The top of the case has a large magnetic dust filter for easy cleaning and has support for 2 fans. At the rear of the case we find the rear I/O panel and one 120mm exhaust fan that can be adjusted. There are also 7 expansion slots, all of which have reusable covers. And finally we find the power supply location. The power supply has an installation plate, meaning that you install the power supply from the rear of the case. The panel fastens to the back of the case using 2 thumb screws. For the bottom of the case, there are 4 plastic feet. The feet do have rubber pads, so the case shouldn't slide around. There is also a full-length removable dust filter that you access from the front of the case, and the feet allow for 14 millimeters of ventilation. The right side panel is steel and is painted the same color as the chassis. To remove the right side panel, you need to undo the 2 captive thumb screws at the back of the case and then slide the panel back and lift it away. There are foam pads on the inside of the channels to help minimize vibrational noise. The left side panel is tempered glass and is held in by 4 thumb screws. To remove the glass panel, undo all 4 thumb screws and then tilt the panel back and lift it away. The glass panel has foam along 2 of the sides, and this is again to help minimize vibrational noise. Now for the inside of the case, there is a basement with 3 cutouts for cable routing. The motherboard tray has 5 cutouts, 4 of which are for cable management. These cutouts do have grommets. There is also a bump out at the front of the case to give more room for cable management along the back side of the case. The Meshify C supports mini ITX, micro ATX, and ATX motherboards. The maximum GPU length is 315 millimeters, but that will be cut down if you go with a front-mounted radiator. The maximum CPU cooler height is 172 millimeters. Now looking at the backside of the motherboard tray, there's 33 millimeters given for cable management thanks to that bump out, and at the back of the case there is 13 millimeters for cable management. We also see a plate that holds 3 2.5-inch drives. This plate is held in by a captive thumb screw. We also see a number of tie downs to help with cable management. Now taking a look at inside the basement, there is support for up to 175 millimeter power supply. There is also a 2 drive bay cage located near the front of the case. These bays can hold either a 3.5-inch or a 2.5-inch drive. The Meshify C supports up to 7 120mm fans or up to 4 140mm fans and 2 120mm fans. This case has 2 dynamic X2 GP12 fans pre-installed, one at the rear and one at the front. The rear can also support a 120mm radiator. Along the top you can have 2 120mm or 2 140mm fans, And it is also possible to fit a 240mm radiator, and there can be 3 120mm or 2 140mm fans at the front. There is also support for up to a 360mm radiator, but to install a 360mm radiator, you'll need to remove the access panel located on the top of the basement and either move or remove the drive cage. To remove the access panel, you'll first need to remove the front panel. The easiest way to remove the front panel is to remove the bottom dust filter and pull the bottom of the front panel away from the chassis. Please keep in mind the cables of the front I/O are attached to the front panel. Once the front panel is removed, then remove the 2 hidden screws holding the access panel in place. You can now remove the access panel, then you want to tilt the case onto its side. To move the drive cage, simply loosen the 4 screws and then slide the drive cage toward the back of the case. To remove the drive cage, first remove the sleds from the back of the case and then remove all 4 screws holding the drive cage to the bottom of the case. Then lift the drive cage up through the basement ceiling. If you choose to remove the drive cage, you now have the option to install a 120mm fan to the floor of the basement. Okay, that's enough talking about the case. It's time to build. So it has been a few days since I built in the Meshify C, which gave me enough time to run my thermal tests and whatnot. But before I get into that, I just wanted to go over a few things that I liked and didn't like about the case. First off, the cable management in this case is really nice with the number of tie downs and the row of Velcro strips you have in that channel. It just makes cable management really simple. It makes it even possible to actually have cable extensions in this case, even though it is very compact. Another thing I really liked about the case is the number and the size of the cutouts on the motherboard tray. It made it really easy to keep everything nice and neat in the case, because you were just able to like pop it out and plug it in directly where you needed it to. You didn't have to run cables every which way to get it to actually go where you wanted it to. Now, the only real issue I have with the Meshify C came up when I started running my thermal testing. With having that front mesh, I was expecting the temperatures to be much lower, but because of that foam that's behind the front panel, the temperatures were really warm, actually borderline even hot. Now, I'll bring up the charts to show you what I mean. Now, starting off with the CPU temperatures, the Meshify C in its stock configuration, that's with 1 rear exhaust fan and 1 front intake. The idle temperature was 10 degrees Celsius as a delta T, and under load had a temperature of 48 degrees. Now, adding an additional front intake brought the temperature down to 47 degrees. With leaving the 2 stock fans where they are and adding 2 top exhaust fans, brought the CPU temperature down to 46 degrees. And then having 1 exhaust fan at the rear plus 3 front intake fans brought the temperature down to 45. Leaving it in that configuration and removing the front panel, that brought the temperature down to 43. Now, comparing Fractal Design's Meshify C to InWin's 103, this is because these are the only 2 cases I have tested thus far with this system configuration. At stock, they both scored the same 48 degrees at load, and that is with the InWin 103 not having any case fans. Now, if we do remove the front panel, the Meshify C does score quite well comparatively. Now, for the more reasonable configurations, the rear exhaust and the 3 front intakes, or the rear exhaust with 1 front intake with the 2 top exhaust fans, the CPU still has a 1 to 2 degree difference than the 103. Now, looking at the GPU temperatures in the stock configuration, the idle temperature was 6 degrees, and at load the GTX 1070 had a delta T of 52. Now, after testing the stock configuration, I just added 1 front intake fan at the top of the front panel, and that caused the GPU to go up 5 degrees to 57. So what's happening here is there's likely some sort of strange vortex happening that then the GPU is essentially just cooking itself, which is not good. Next up is the rear exhaust with the 3 front intakes, and that managed to bring the GPU temperature down to 48.5 degrees. With the 1 exhaust fan at the rear and the 1 intake fan at the front with the 2 exhaust fans on top, brought the GPU temperature down to 45. And having the 1 rear exhaust with the 3 fans at the front with the panel removed brought the temperature down to 44. And again, comparing Fractal Design's Meshify C to InWin's 103, because I only have these 2 cases tested, the Meshify C's best result with a rear exhaust and 3 front intakes with no front panel still was 2 degrees warmer than the best result for the InWin's 103. Now again, for the more reasonable configurations of the Meshify C, having the 1 rear exhaust with 1 front intake and having 2 exhaust fans at the top managed to hit pretty much right in the middle. With the test of the Meshify C with 1 rear exhaust fan and 2 front intakes being at the bottom of the list. So I strongly recommend not just adding 1 intake fan to the front of the case. Now, I do feel that Fractal Design made a pretty nice case here. It's just that you're going to have to figure out what cooling configuration best suits your system. Guess I'm done for this video, so all the normal stuff. If you like the video, you know what to do. Click the subscribe button and the bell icon so you get notified whenever I drop a new video. And as always, thanks for watching, and see you next time.